and welcome to hello and welcome to another episode of the midierror Meets podcast, where we speak to a wide range of people from the music world. On the episode this time, we've got David from Plogue, who are an incredible synth software development company, making all kinds of different devices really, but they are known for their chip emulations like their Megadrive or Genesis, Chipsynth MD. Porta FM as well is an emulation of a classic Portasound keyboard, and they've just released a new SNES chipsynth, the SFC. There is now a GoFundMe page for the podcast if you want to donate. You could also donate a few pounds by Ko-fi if you like. All of the donations go back to the running of the show, and I'm pleased to say we've had our first donation. And so Bjorn Schellin is the first person who goes on the MIDI Arpeggiation Hall of Fame. Thank you very much for your donation, Bjorn. That's much appreciated. But let's get into the podcast. The first question I asked David was about his musical beginnings.
My first memories of music and some tales that my mother has talked to me again is, well, I'm autistic, and back when nobody knew what that was much or at all, and people were scared that I was the guy sitting in a room just with a record player as a 1-year-old and 2-year-old, and just my cousins were playing and laughing and running around, and I was just listening to music, and people, what's wrong with this guy? Now I know, and it's quite fascinating. So I listened to pretty much everything, local French stuff here, and well, of course, Beatles and Elvis and ABBA. My dad was a huge fan of ABBA, so that got played a lot. But yeah, Beatles really struck me very early on as something interesting. But my dad was also into a lot of at the time disco, so lip sync and funky town and that sort of stuff, and Pat Benatar, and anything I could get my hands on I played in the mid to late 70s. Yeah.
Wow. And is there, because you live in Montreal, in Canada, is there much of, like, how do you have like a more prominence for French speaking music or English? What's the sort of balance you have there?
No, there's, well, I mean, the thing I always say is, yeah, there is some very, very good stuff locally in Montreal in French, but you take the pool of talent in the world is such a way that the chances are the best stuff is here, because we're 8 million people compared to the rest of the world is kind of slim. So I have no problems listening to anything else. There's standouts for me in my musical education here in Montreal, which is, in French we say harmonium and beau dommage, which are really pop 70s-ish with a slight touch of prog, but not too much, or like keeping the pop and folk roots, but telling stories of who we are, and like from the suburbs or the les ruelles, which is the back alleys of houses in Montreal, which was quite famous. So they talk about that sort of stuff, and it resonated with people here a lot.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I think any new musical sounds for people to hear are welcome. So yeah, any sort of act that maybe we English speakers wouldn't know of would be it would be really beneficial to hear about.
Yeah, well, like I said, harmonium, I guess you'd say in English, is quite relatively known. I think even though they're local from here, they have albums which have been. I mean, they nearly made it big, and the leader just didn't want that amount of fame. And I mean, they started a world tour, and they just said screw it, and they stopped doing it. But they're quite well known if you do research on them. So I could give you a link.
Excellent. Oh, cool, man. Thank you. And when did you start making music of your own? When did you start experimenting with instruments?
That's funny. It was really on cheap Casios and. I mean, the sad thing about music education when you don't specialize in it is that you do the boring stuff of playing a recorder and everybody plays out a tune in the class. And so it gives you a wrong idea of what music can be. And it's really my late teens that I always looked at the guitar my dad bought at one point thinking he would learn it and never actually did. And I guess one of the reasons that didn't help, it was a really cheap Kent. And at one point, I just started picking it up and trying to play it. And I soon upgraded to a Ibanez which I still have back here, like
Excellent.
tuned in C with really genty sort of strings on it. I don't use it much. And really, I mean, computer music and video game music earlier on, especially the Commodore 64, really blew my mind. And I've been stuck forever since then. This is really, you have a few things that you discover in life that really blows your mind. That would be the sound of what a computer can do. And for me, that was through the Commodore 64 SID chip. And so my good friend had one, and I was always at his place recording like the TV with a cheap tape recorder and playing it back home and begging my dad to give me one. That took like 3 years or something before I had my own. And by then everyone was like, many people were stepping away from Commodore 64 and to Amigas or IBM PCs or just playing on Nintendo and Super Nintendo. But I stuck on my Commodore 64 up until college, actually. So like early, the first time I went on the internet, I'm opening so many doors. You need to stop me at one point.
It's fine. No, you're going in the right direction.
Yeah. I first logged on to the internet on my birthday in November '94, and it was on a Commodore 64 with a 1200 K modem, a BUD. So that was kind of interesting.
Excellent, man. Well, I mean, there's loads of like musical influences in there and loads of incredible, like you say, a lot of directions where you could go. I would like to say right now that I do have a Commodore 64 sitting over there, which has got synth carts and retro scoy and Messiah. So I'm going into, I've had it for years and I haven't really played around with it too much. So I'm like, yeah, this is now the time to sit and play with it. That's amazing, man. So yes, what
6581 or 8580?
I don't know.
Is it brown? Is it brown or white? That
brown.
helps. Okay, so 6581, unless it's been heavily modified. That's the older one with a really distorting filter that we all like, or most of us like. So some hate it, but for me that's where it all started.
Nice, man. Yeah, I remember the Commodore 64 was amazing growing up, and I think looking back at it now, there's the response of the games, like I guess some of them, the frame rates were really terrible, but they seem quite like fluid, and it's so vivid, isn't it? The way that it looks like in the video games.
Oh yeah, it definitely has its style. I mean, I just see one frame of a Commodore 64 and I know it just because of the palette, the color schemes is so weird. You really know.
It's like a really weird brown and sort of a bluey purple, and yeah, exactly. What games were you playing? What games did you go out playing?
Of course, all the Epics games, summer games, winter games. We played that a lot. But my friends and I made like all summer long, like battles of Lords of Conquest and Mule. So that's where like multiplayer games on that were amazing, and they weren't the most good looking, but the challenge that we had, like 4 players sharing the 2 joysticks and fighting over that was just amazing.
Oh, I see. Wow, yeah, multiplayer on one unit, right? Not like LAN.
Yeah.
No
so
LAN
you have
system.
two joysticks, and at one point, it's player one's turn. Okay, who gets the joysticks now? And the 2 unlucky ones get to play with the Q and A keys and stuff when there's like trading going on. So you can play 4-player, but like 2 people on the keyboard and 2 others with a joystick.
I forgot about those days. Or like there was times when people got like, you get the unofficial controller because you're just the guest. I'm getting the official one. You know, there's always there's like priority or hierarchy of controller, wasn't there? Yeah, that's brilliant, man. Yeah. That's amazing. And so did you still dabble with the guitar? Even, I know, like obviously the electronic stuff was important to you. Did you?
It's been I was a music fan before touching an instrument, and that's one of the big stupid I don't know. You do lots of stuff when you were a kid, and I only started playing guitar at 18-ish, and since then, like I bought my first MIDI keyboards around like 93, 92, 94. And from there, like I've been on a gas rampage and picking up lots of stuff. I mean, I guess you know that, but the early 90s were like the early to mid 90s were like a golden age of us being able to pick up like crazy amounts of gear for cheap because people were getting rid of the digital stuff. Absolutely. And interested back in analog. So, or just like ignoring both and just wanting to have a workstation with general MIDI sounds and we could get some deals. It's incredible. I could brag along, but
please do let me hear it, because I know people that have got SH101s for like £50 and stuff. But yeah,
I got an SH101 back there, but I didn't pay it cheap. My younger brother bought it, and he needed money, so I bought him back for $1,000 Canadian. Not actually a deal, but even then, now I think I could sell it for more, but. I'd say I got a busted Juno 106, one with like one or two voices dead, so people just got rid of them, and I eventually fixed it, like it's in prime condition, and I got it for a trade with something I don't remember, and a Moog Prodigy for like $150.
Oh wow!
And the story was incredible. You need to put yourself in a mindset of someone who bought this earlier and thought it was like it's monophonic, you can do anything with it. It's completely out of date, and no one wants that. So it wasn't in the paper, actually, the little ads that you get, like selling instruments. I think it was 95, and I mean in a suburb, and the dude like listed it as a mini Moog. So mini Moog for 125. Like, so I called the guy. Oh, it's actually a Prodigy. Well, yeah, we'll still go get it. You know? Yeah. So I get there in the driveway and I see his little girl like running to the house. Daddy, he's here. And then I'm prompted to go downstairs, and this guy just starts to play like 5 keyboards at once and just does a solo on the Prodigy, I guess to make it sound more impressive, so I don't leave and not buy it. Here's the money. Yeah, here's the money. Thank you. And we were laughing all the way to the car, and like for the 20 minutes or 30 minutes it took to get back home. So Moog Prodigy. Amazing. Yeah.
Great synth.
Yeah. Awesome. And since it's we don't much work on analog emulation, but like definitely if we went there, he'd be it'd be prodded. But I mean, there's so much analog emulation, so we could get back to that. But one of the reasons why, anyway, I guess you have plenty of questions on what we do and how we approach the research. Or
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I do like to get involved in the sort of. The computer game chat, and particularly like any synth purchases people have got over the years. Yeah. So where did you go from then? Like playing video games, and did you have a desire to make your own video games or go into software development?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. In my early 20s, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I've been playing and programming just random crap on a Commodore 64 and cracking games just for fun. We didn't have a distribution network. Just say I bought a game and I crack it and my friend can have it. It was just like a challenge. I shouldn't say that.
No, everyone did that. I mean, were you swapping tapes with each other? Because in England, I don't
floppies. Remember... Yeah, we bought our 1541s to my friends, and we duplicated things like with Fast Nibble or whatever we had to duplicate 5 1/4 discs.
Exactly. Like I don't remember really hardly ever seeing like the original copies of games. Like someone would hand you a game and be like, "Oh wow, it's the original. Oh wow, I didn't even know these things existed."
That's fascinating, because I had the same reflection. My first official like Commodore 64 games that I bought was the first official Dungeons and Dragons game called Pools of Radiance. And it came with 8 floppies, and I kept looking at the stickers of the floppies. I mean, I own an original Commodore 64 game, and I was flabbergasted by that, because that was the first time. Because, I mean, locally in my suburb of Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, south of Montreal, there's no way you can find a Commodore 64 game in a store. It just doesn't happen. They're like CompuCenters and stuff and specialized, but they were like in different cities, or nothing locally I could get my hands on that had any. I mean, the Mastertronics games were sold at retail store, but they were like budget games. We never saw like the big the big good games that we wanted in the stores ever.
We used to have like mail order. You used to have to, like, if you really wanted a choice of video games or accessories, you had this magazine that you could subscribe to that would come to your house, and then you could order a particular cable, because like you say, the video game shops that were on the high street just didn't have what you really wanted.
And in fact, it's funny because, as I said, I stayed a long time on a Commodore 64, and I bought Commodore format magazines imported from the UK at incredibly, stupidly high prices.
It's so worth it, man. I mean, you sort of read them for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah.
You know, archive.org has a really good...
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it incredible? The archive of video game magazines.
The Commodore Compute Gazette, Compute Magazine, Run, and like Commodore format. I go there once in a while just to pick a random one and just look at the ads and the reader questions and like what were the questions that people had in those days and how they approach computer science and what pre-internet, like it's really fascinating.
It is, and I think with people that grew up with computers back then, you have an ingrained sense of patience for things.
Yeah. Like
there was no instant gratification in, because I remember hours and hours, maybe even days spent on trying to get the sound working in a video game. You know, and then you get it working and you play the game for about 20. You know, you spent like 4 hours trying to get the sound card driver to work or get something to install properly in DOS for hours. And then
you're way more satisfied when it starts to work.
Yeah, I mean, it did lead you. It always sort of led you into like, oh my God, you've nearly done it. Or it worked for 2 seconds on the intro. Or it worked for the FMV, but then nothing else. But I think it really instilled a sense of patience in people because there was no... You had to like learn things and you had to wait for like those people that were writing to the magazine saying, please can you tell me how to do this sort of thing, they would have to wait like 2 months until, even if their letter was printed.
They probably found their answer by themselves. So that's an interesting thing about tech support that I could get into, about like if you answer right away, I mean, you're making sure they're asking the stupid question right after, before like thinking from themselves and just trying. And if you just spend like not answer for 15 minutes, often they say, "Oh, I found the answer. Thank you. Bye." So you try to be polite, but at the same time, and it's human, and I do that as well. If you know somebody has the answer and he's readily available, you're just gonna bug him. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've all sent the consecutive email sort of 5 minutes later going, oh, actually, I worked it out.
Yeah.
I guess for me, the thing with customer support that is a little bit frustrating is when you work with someone for a long time to solve their problem and you assume their problem is solved because they just fall off the radar after your last email. I always find that's like if you spent a long time helping someone to get it set up, fair enough, like they just want to go and play on it. But for me personally, that's a slightly frustrating side of customer support.
Yeah, a related issue we have is sometimes like a customer reports a bug, and at one point I suggest one thing and they said, okay, it works. Well, what actually fixed it? Or can you tell me, can you run this particular test? No, it's all right, it's working now. No, but we want to fix it for future customers.
For other people.
And they just don't care. Like, it works for me, or they don't answer. But we want to, if there's a critical issue, say an installer thing, and some file got mismatched or miscopied or had wrong permissions or whatever.
But they are a minority, I'd say, for me personally, anyway. In customer support, it's a minority of cases. Most people are really nice, they're really friendly, and they're really grateful for the help. Yeah,
they are. I was getting to, I think before, like, we're going to open so many doors, and I'm not going to close.
Okay.
Like what bring me? I was really looking forward to. I'm not looking forward to studying computer science because I was really, really scared of starting to hate it because it was always been my passion and thing. My hobby was always like messing with computers and figuring how things worked. And just the thought of being a day job was incredibly boring for me, and I was stressed for a long time and scared about it. So I went to do like cinema classes and art classes and stuff like that, which was amazing. And at one point, okay, I have this opportunity there, and they're offering me like to go into the smaller program, and I need to prove that I can good grades so they can upgrade me to the full baccalaureate here. And so I was accepted as 1 year term in computer science and Université de Montréal, and then I got good grades, and then I went on to do the whole thing. And meanwhile, my interest in well, of course, for me personally, I started playing music in the early 90s, and what was going on in the early 90s, we all know, like all the Seattle scene and the indie scene and things that I didn't know was possible. And then from that, I started to be interested in industrial music. So of course the Ministries and the Nine Inch Nails and the Skinny Puppies and the Frontline Assemblies and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And from then on to more artsy techno like Aphex Twin and then Square Pusher and all that sort of stuff, which led me to being fascinated by German minimal techno from Köln. So that's what I've been briefly DJing. Like in the late 90s, I've bought truckloads of records to spin this. A few nights, like Tuesday nights at a specific bar in Montreal, you could see me like 2 times a month. So that's the amount of gigs that I played. But for maybe 3 years, and was quite nice with the co-founder of Plogue, which is called Sébastien. Bidule. So we both worked together at that club. I'm trying to concentrate on what I want to say, and there's a cat like meowing at the door.
Well, yeah, you were talking about your record collection and DJing and stuff. Yeah, you have got quite a formidable collection to your left there.
I guess. Yeah. Well, there's plenty of generic stuff. There's lots of rock, lots of pop, but I have a special section that's like, I don't know, maybe a meter wide, which is all like minimal techno of like, say, late 90s to 2002 or something. So yeah, compact, basic channel, that sort of stuff.
Oh, wow. The only artist I know of who's on compact is Rex the Dog, I think. I think he's had a few releases on compact, but basic channel. They've released some incredible stuff, haven't they? Like sort of like the
early
seminal
dub techno, which is
excellent.
Yeah, but My King, Thomas Brinkman, and Monolake, of course, from which we all know is one of the founders of Ableton. I guess the two guys are.
Yeah, and what would be your sort of standout tracks that your sort of go to?
Oh, there's one track, a few tracks from Compact's more obscure label called Auftrieb. I guess I don't know how you pronounce it in German. I could give you a sample of it. It's called Leucum, and I just love that track. It's so gritty. But we all have those tracks that we kind of, I don't know if it's the case for you, but one of those tracks that we keep for ourselves until, you really want to get the steam out. There's one particular drill and bass track from Alec Empire and Panacea that I play when I want to. Like, this is what I need at one point, and after that, I'm so calm. It's Alec Empire versus Panacea. It's just from Chrome Records 7, I think. Mm-hmm. And that really, I played this to death. And there's one remix by Autechre, from various artists that I really like as well. It's like, you think it's repetitive. There's always something shifting in the background slowly, or like, and you don't really notice it, but it never, your mind is never bored because it's always kind of progressing slowly. It's perfect work, and I've been coding with minimal techno and really atmospheric stuff for ages. It just syncs my brain to code for some reason.
Mm. Yeah, I think there definitely are certain types of music that lend themselves to different operations. And techno I find is a good one for working as well. What is it about that minimal techno that you particularly like? Because I mean, techno does span a really broad range of sort of stuff. What is it about the minimal industrial stuff that draws you in?
I love the grittiness. I love texture. I love grain. Yeah, that would be a thing. So a pulsing beat that drives you, but at the same time always challenges your brain with sort of textures that you wonder how they were created. Like, which distortion pedal is that? Is that a glitch in hardware? So I don't know if you know Pole.
I don't know. No.
Yeah, it's a German artist that has a label, and he created a whole persona, not persona, but a series of records. Because his Waldorf pole was broken, and he kind of made these little clicks and blips.
Right.
So like throughout the three releases, that's one thing that stands out. Like it's sort of like vinyl cracking, but it's like DSP clicks, but it's kind of unique bloppiness because it's filter related. I mean, it's quite unique.
Yeah, there is something great about when synths or when machines break down a little bit, they start to do things that no one's ever heard before, and you sort of know it.
I mean, it's the same thing with some like rock tricks of like stabbing a knife inside a speaker cone and making it buzz in a certain way. I love that sort of stuff, really.
Do you have like experimental music nights in Montreal where people do sound stuff?
Well, yeah, the Montreal and the surroundings have had like musique concrète and well, there's a Mutech festival that's really well known worldwide right now. That's that we used to go to. Like we were Mutech rats in the early 20s. The first 3 editions of Mutech, we didn't sleep for a week and just go everywhere. But at the same time, at a certain point, I mean, it gets like the festival of jazz where you always see the same artists. So year after year, it starts to be less experimental, and you kind of, okay, he's gonna, like Thomas Brinkman is playing, and I love these guys. At one point, like there's a renewal that you don't feel, you know.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's true with anything.
So festivals become stale at some point by re-inviting always the same people.
Definitely.
Or maybe I'm so disconnected that maybe I'm saying like somebody will hate me. that in fact there's many people creating lots of good stuff, but I can't keep up. So
yeah, I think it's fair. I think it's true that like there's so many amazing people making music that it's probably not. It's not really fair that some huge artist is always getting that gig when there's other people that are like really pushing it, that are probably really struggling as well, and they're not getting a look in because they're not signed, or they haven't got the right promoter or the right manager,
or they don't know the right person.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that's a fair point. Yeah. Cool. So you went to university to do computer science.
Yeah.
And what did you do post university? Like where were you at?
Yeah, I started working in a few jobs and progressively jumping to things that were closer to home. So I started doing like military flight simulators.
Wow.
So that was the farthest away from what I wanted to do in life. And actually that made me visit the UK a few times, because I was on the Benson Air Base. I went to Yeovilton.
Wow.
I saw Stonehenge. I had to drive from Heathrow to Land's End for like at 6 a.m, driving on the wrong side of the street, mind you.
Yeah, it's not easy.
With a rented car. I don't know how I did that, but
that's incredible.
But UK was fascinating. I did for like 3 years, just working on the audio side of flight simulators. So anything that the systems there, like they simulate everything. So the air traffic controller tower detects your presence when you're flying with these big like flight simulator things, and they need to interact with the pilot and do all sorts of Tango, Alpha, Bravo thingies. So I integrated, like one of the things that I did there, which kind of echoes what I did later, is for certain reason, like one of the contracts that we had to do was to provide like 8 different voices that was randomly changed so that the pilot didn't feel like, oh, I'm going to Benson or to this airbase, and it's always the same voice, like suspension of disbelief sort of problem. So contractually wise, like finding someone good enough and had a proper voice to sound like someone who's done that before was quite hard. So I said, why don't we take and this open source speech synthesizer and make it say all these things. So the poor people had to suffer listening to speech synthesized voice, 7 different speech synthesized voice and 1 human, depending on which tower they went to. So that was the kind of stuff that I did. So I did some audio. So I didn't do it wasn't like a. But in the end, knowing that I was doing that for the military it didn't go right with me in my brain and looking at myself in the mirror in the morning. So I got an opportunity to work in media, which is basically, and that's when that's one of the reasons. There's so many things that tie me to the UK. One company was called Snell and Wilcox. Previously, they were called Post Impressions, and I worked on synchronizing audio and video for like early HD equipment. So the stuff that was used for like special effects in Episode 2 of Star Wars was made by the company I work with.
Wow,
and
nice!
I went to Newbury, UK for that for a week, and I just love UK pubs. I guess you miss them as well.
Yeah, they changed a lot, man. Those must have been in the days where you could smoke in the pub too. Like that was such a special time.
Yeah, I don't miss the smoke, but I miss the ambience that it created.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They are very homely. I think that there's pubs I've been to in England that have got they've got open fires and just you really feel like you're with family in an open space. It's almost like someone's house sometimes when you go into a pub. Yeah, that's cool. Was that? I'm just trying to think. Newbury, is that like Pinewood? Was that be Pinewood or one of the big film places? Where? No,
it was a small. No, we didn't work directly at a film studio. It was really just an office that developed the hardware and software that was then used by movie productions and TV, especially TV. But
that's so cool, man.
I didn't stay there for long because I don't know. It just like we're going down in my psyche now. Like if I don't 100% like what I work on, I don't get motivated enough, and I feel bad for the people that hire me. And that was a constant thing later on. I wasn't happy with myself because I didn't feel like I gave my employer my 100% because I wasn't happy enough in that sort of work. And I just didn't feel right about this. And for some reason, we started just for fun earlier on. I guess I started dabbling with my first VST plugins, like the free stuff, in 2000. I released my first beta plugin in 99, actually. It was called Rebuilder, and it was just me learning how FFT work and trying. I started with the hubris of saying, oh, that analyzes frequency content, so I thought I could take a full mix and separate stuff. Like what Melodyne does with like 5 PhDs. I thought I could do that in 5 months in 2000 with just the FFT tutorial and
very
some
ambitious.
basic DSP. Well, yeah, I quickly realized I couldn't do that, but like I transformed the ideas and the code that I've done into some kind of weird analysis synthesis sort of thing where you analyze all the frequencies and you generate them with a bank of like square waves or saws or snares with a threshold depending on which frequencies are there. So it created really typically IDM-ish bleep bloops and cool. MP3 artifacts sort of stuff.
Yeah, and what were you using to like model that? What did you build that in?
Nothing, just guesswork and trying and just send a beat in there, send just a noise and tweak the parameters until some cool stuff comes out. Excellent. And I just thought I'd do that for fun. It was never really an intention of doing it full time at all. I guess many people start that way or started that way. And back then, I don't want to sound like an old guy, but I've been doing VST plugins for 20 years, and we weren't that many. It's incredible. You see the amount of companies doing that, and I kind of understand. I don't think most of them have the impression that they're going to make a living out of them, but it's just so fun. Creating plugins and interacting with artists and making stuff that, like, if you're lucky, is going to be used by a certain artist that you like is really, really incredibly rewarding. And but it was up until like 2000. And yeah, we started doing Bidule, which is our modular VST host, right about that time, 2001. And that was just me being frustrated that Audio Mulch didn't have like MIDI routing. Russ Benzina is a really cool guy, and I talked to him and say, "Why don't you implement MIDI routing?" And he says, "Nah, it's not the goal. You just MIDI is done. Has no place in a modular route." That was his opinion at the time, if I recall correctly. Sorry, Ross, if you're listening.
Is it an Australian company?
Yeah. It's one guy and his brother, like Russ Benzina, I think.
Super fun. I remember messing around with Audio Mulch and just being like, this is amazing. This doesn't feel, because I guess around that time was maybe like Fruity Loops 3, like Reason, maybe 3 or 4 at that time. So
I don't think even Reason was there. I think didn't Reason come out in 2002 or 3 or something like that?
Yeah, maybe it was Rebirth. Check. Maybe it was pre.
Rebirth. Rebirth was there in 97, 98, I think, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, but Audio Mulch is really, really, really amazing sort of.
Well, the big difference between Audio Mulch and stuff that came before, like Vaz Modular and all the early DSP stuff, is that it was real time, and the only equivalent was only on Mac. So if you didn't have a Mac and you couldn't run Mac's MSP, which everyone was using in the IDM scene, and to a certain extent probably still, because of its integration in Ableton, is Audio Mulch was like the only thing that was real time. It has just the right amount of cool things, not enough low-level modules to do like custom DSP, but still you had loopers, you could plug VST plugins in there, so the Hyperprism plugs, if you know that track. And yeah, so it's a shameful ripoff. It started as a shameful ripoff of Audio Mulch, but adding all the stuff we wanted to do. And at the same time, we started that in 2001, and all the structure of the graph and all the modules are really like the examples of what you typically think of as some object-oriented programming trick, like defining your modules and classes. And so it was really learning how to tweak C++ into doing real-time audio processing. So we were learning like how to do DSP, how to make musicians tool, and how to use this language that we didn't really know, because sadly at university we learned Simula, which no one ever heard about.
I've never heard of it.
We didn't learn C++, and then the university started teaching Java after, which makes a bit more sense. But still, so we learned C++ at the same time and how it worked with it. And then, because we had a stable VST host inside Bidule, we started to get interest from OEM partners, and the first one being Garriton. Do you remember Garriton plugins? We started doing a small VST host so that it can host like multiple copies of Contact to make a bigger orchestra for the personal orchestra plugin. So that was really the start point of, hey, and we actually got paid, not, I wouldn't say generously, but fairly for this, and say, hey, we could maybe do that for a living. And then Garriton starting to say, well, we're using Contact now, but what we really want is to have our own engine and tweak it the way we want for our own instruments and do it all in-house, and say, can you do a sampler engine? Yeah, I could. Like hubris again when you're really young.
That's brilliant.
And okay, so basically I dropped my employer. I went full-time making a sample playback engine called Aria, which we started working on in 2005. And so Steinway, the first product that came out of that was the official Steinway plugin. Sadly, it's not for sale anymore, but it was like how to test an engine that you start from, a big piano with like 128 voice polyphony. When you hit the sustain pedal and you whack all your keys with your elbows, and it needs not to click and stream from disc. That was a really awesome challenge. And I remember playing this Rachmaninoff like intro in C minor, like over and over to benchmark this thing and to optimize the code. So Garreton used that, but part of the deal was we could also use the technology for our own Plogue software. But at the time, I didn't know what to do. And by the way, in the evenings while that was going on, I just had a house and expendable money, so I started to buy consoles and stuff that I'd never had before. And that was still when early eBay or pre-eBay, where you could still find some stuff in yard sales. Box Commodore 64s for $10 and you know sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I hoarded a lot of things, and I started to listen more carefully about the differences of each console. Like Intellivision sounded that way. I knew the Atari 2600 had a particular sound to it, and then like modifying them for better video and audio outputs. And then, hey guys, we should do some big sample library of like video game sounds. Like they all went, well, there's plenty of freebies around, and so nobody believed in. If the amount of time, if I stopped each time somebody close to me saying it would never work, I would have never done anything.
Yeah, that's true for everyone, man. Yeah, definitely. Like, just do what drives you. You know, if you can feel it, go in that direction.
Definitely. So it's always a challenge. Okay, I'll prove you wrong.
And that's the other driving factor, isn't it?
Yeah, I did some bad decisions, a few, but oftentimes like my instincts were right, and I kind of. If I have an idea right now, I can, okay, let's do this, guys, and I'm more confident in what I can achieve and the sort of products I want to do. So back to chip sounds, there was nothing out there at that point when we started working on this in 2007-ish, more seriously. And I soon realized that just sampling wouldn't cut it. And that's one of the things. I don't want to hit on the hail and to hit with a hammer on the head of on my competitors, but sampling 8-bit consoles makes no sense, just because of the physics of square waves. Because if you're talking sampling, you're talking interpolation and pitch shifting, and you can't pitch shift or slow down a square wave because it stops being a square wave. Just you can think of it; it starts to it becomes a triangle. And early on, the Amiga crowd noticed that, and you can't really. It needs a different approach. So I stopped. I sampled quite a few things, but then again, I just my sampler engine was modified in a way that you could either, for each key that you press or region that you define, it can either trigger a sample or trigger sound generator that's implemented in a plugin, in a sub plugin, or what I call sound generator plugin or whatever. And from then on, I modeled most of the waveforms that were in the Commodore 64, the Nintendo, and I kind of made a lot of compromises with regards to like the specificities of this or that particular console. Because, like for instance, in the SID chip, there are 3 voices, and they can be tied to each other. So you can ring mod one to the other and hard sync one to the other, and you can send that to a filter, and there's limitations, and one filter for 3 voices, and you know the drill. Mm-hmm. And if you want to take all the sound chips in the world that people are familiar with, and to put them all in the same like pedestal, and I don't know how to say that in English, but on the same level, and to be able to mix and match, pedestal. Let's say an Atari 2600 with a SID chip and make a polyphonic patch with it, then you can't really follow the exact limitations of each of these consoles. So I had to design this thing where each, if you take each voices of each sound chip separately, it sounds indistinguishable from the real thing. But as a whole, if you're trying to mimic this exact platform, then there's this thing that might not work. So that's why, although I still love this piece of software, I've decided to a clean slate, and I could go on to why we did this other line with a small venture on speech synthesis in the middle with chip speech. Everything starts with speech, and mind you, we're not only our I guess our customers are confused by all the chip products, but we're also confused by them as well. So we just say speech or synth or sounds or crusher, and we don't say the chip prefix ever because it's just too confusing.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of love for your product, certainly. It's amazing to hear like the trajectory of where you've been to get to where you are now. Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say, going back a few minutes, is that it is an amazing thing. Like, it's a really honest way of being, that you don't want to be in a job where you don't feel like you're like, really pushing it, and you're really doing what you want to do. I think that's an amazing like characteristic that you have, to be that honest, because maybe a lot of people grow up in jobs they hate.
Why did they do that? I don't know either. It better be poor. Because that's one thing I always say. Like, people think you're not rich making plugins. You're not. Like,
I would agree with that.
Like, most of us just, I mean, for some companies, depending on where they are, I know many friends, like, sometimes it's ups and downs. Sometimes you're barely profiting. We don't give ourselves dividends like ever. It happened once. I mean, we're lucky to break even with a salary. Like, I won't give details, but I'm not paying myself the salary that I would get working elsewhere. But the advantages are I'm waking up and I create what I want. It's worth 1,000. Exactly. It's worth 100K more in salary to me.
Exactly, man. I hear you. I'm sort of feel that I'm in a similar position too, and it's a lovely place to be. And we spoke before we started recording about the merging of hobbying and work life, and like they both just continue on like together, which is sort of a lovely thing to drive forward.
Well, the thing is about that, like, the only time that I make a difference on what is actually work is like tech support and reading emails and like setting up the website or all the and each time there's actually research that's going on, or recording or analyzing this piece of hardware, then it's just fun, and that part of the product design for me is like the driving force. I can put up with all the naggings and the bugs and the tech support issues and the yearly or monthly change everything aspect of the Apple and Mac OS platform that we have to endure. And when you spend like 6 months and you're not bringing anything new for the customers, really, you're just helping Apple make more money. So that's
funny, that, isn't it?
Yeah, that pisses me off to no end. And we have to put up with it.
Plugin developers. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it must form enough of a proportion of your customer base for it to be worth it, but I can see how that's frustrating. But I think, like, Apple have been rocking the boat a lot recently, and I guess that people don't love them through the rose-tinted glasses like they did maybe 10 years ago when, like, I mean, I like Hackintoshes. I like the idea of Hackintosh. To me, that's a cool thing.
They still make pretty nice hardware. I like the aesthetics. It's just the business and politics, and I think at this point I'm tempted to say purposely deprecating all the SDKs like routinely year after year, so that developers are stuck wasting time keeping up. I don't see otherwise. It must be written somewhere in management, like rules that they have to do for developers. And some developers are happy to just recode everything each month. And since we started 20 years ago, there wasn't any JUCE platform. There wasn't. The only thing that was remotely similar was the VST SDK, VST GUI platform. So what we're using now is some weird Frankenstein mix of VST GUI with like 20 years of special code added to it. So it doesn't look like it. And so people say, oh, you could port your stuff easier to iOS if you had JUCE. Well, not invented here, sorry. Yeah, it would be if we started now, we would take all the nice toolkits that have been created, but I'm old and I'm used to doing my stuff my way, and I don't know if you're like this, but I don't want to depend on anything that I can't. I mean, I want to be angry at my own code, not against somebody else's code. I want to be like, that's my fault, and you slap yourself. You're not angry at somebody else or judging somebody else's design decision about like why this is impossible in this SDK. Just roll your sleeves and you code it yourself. But the process is 10 times longer. And we ship one product a year if we're lucky. And well, there's reasons that we're completely like obsessive about details, but
I think the stuff you make is great as it is. Like, you don't need to change.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think we all here, everyone. It's like you've not only got to learn a new language to make something in a different software. You've got to learn how to learn that language as well. And there's like so much. It's like you reach a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Like, you'd maybe lose like a year and a half of development time to just making what you've got now in a different environment. I mean, it would be interesting to know, like, how are you modeling, like, when you've got like a Commodore 64 next to your software, how are you, or a Megadrive, or a PSS 280, like, how are you comparing those software generations to the hardware?
We need like 5 hours, but one of the very I wonder if your listeners or yourself has seen one of my latest videos on my YouTube channel. This is one thing I do when a project is near complete. I spend a week or so like going through the technical details of how we did all of these things, and I just love doing that. It's so fun. I mean, for some reason people like it. It's incredibly nerdy. But explains like all the modifications we did to consoles and how we basically it's, and I'm going to do the same, by the way, for our next product is a DX7. Why another DX7 plugin, you might ask? Frankly, because we started 10 years ago and there wasn't any Dext. There wasn't the Arturia one. So basically there was a few like really barely emulations that weren't close enough to my opinion, and just
FM8, isn't it?
FM8, true. FM8 was there, but it never. FM8 never claimed that it was a DX7 emulator. It was always yes, we import DX7 SysX patches, SysX, but it's meant to do something else. There's new waveforms. There's a bigger like a modulation graph, and operators that you can route around. So it was on purpose that it sounded like, but don't stop there. I mean, we've done FM8 or FM7 to do something else. The challenge of saying that a DX7 hasn't been, to my opinion, never perfectly modeled before was very enticing, and it was just one of the many we basically took all the Yamaha FM chips and one after the other put them on the breadboard and proto board and prodding it separately. Basically you feed you look at what it's supposed to do and say this address with this value should technically give you that output, but we do it systematically, like try all the combinations of stuff. So we have digital, hit the mic there.
It's okay.
We have some scripts and code that actually talks to each of these chips, and we have on the other end something digitally that captures the output. So it's a feedback loop of iterations where you can like, what will you do if I send you that? Oh, you do that. Okay, so this means like you have theories and you kind of prove it. So it's like a constant circle of like trying new things and asking the chip, even like the registers that weren't technically documented by Yamaha or by anyone. What does that do? Does that influence the pitch? Is that a vibrato? Is that an LFO? If you do that in a certain order, does the LFO reset? I mean, I'm going to really, really technical details. And
no, I think you have to ask all of these. Yeah, like you say, you have to like ask questions of it and fire.
And if
go on.
The way I think about it is that most emulations out there really treats the whole system as a black box. In the case of the DX7, they send SysX to it. modify it in a, I don't know, MIDI quest or something, all the parameters, they look at what the output is doing, and it's guessing at a very high level what it must be doing underneath. Whereas we open the DX7, there's two main chips that produce sound differently. There's a CPU, there's a DAC, and there's a sub CPU, and we analyze each and every one of them separately. Tell me exactly what you need to do, and then after, when we have exact module emulations of each of these separate things, you can make the big picture. And then you don't have the weird case where you change one thing, it fixes one preset and it breaks two others. You don't see that,
Right, yeah,
because
you
it's
don't
always a
get,
compromise.
ambiguities.
Yeah, that's it. So that's the sort of stuff that you gain by doing it the hard way and it's not commercially viable because it's so long and tedious that nobody in their right mind would do that, but we do it for fun. So that's our advantage. We don't look at the hours. We don't really so yeah, that's how we can manage to do things accurately. It's just we don't look at the hours. It's just a challenge that we need to go, and we're not satisfied until we hear or see a difference in a spectrograph. We're at the point where it might sound like I'm bragging, but it's not only I stop when I don't hear a difference with my ears, it's when I don't make differences with my tools. Spectrum analyzer or phase inversion, mixing of digital signals, it needs to be a flat silence, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, this test is passed, let's go into the next one.
Well, I think that amazing level of detail that you go into, you have a YouTube video of going your test rigs for the Megadrive,
and for the Super Nintendo. My last two videos are
Yeah, I can't wait to try that one, man. And people do love the detail of that, and I think that's where your plugins stand out above the competitors. Is you have what's it? Newgrounds are doing a competition, aren't they? With your synth, the new SNES Chipsynth SFC, and you've got Grant Kirkhope.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Judging it, and David Viens. So you've got these seminal gaming composers who are judging your the production of people using your software, man. That's a great. It's a credit to the software you've made.
And in Japan, Yuzo Koshiro started to be interested in our FM stuff, and that was really, David Wise, Kirkhope, and all and Koshiro was really wow. That's we didn't expect that. They're listening to it and they say, "Wow, it sounds as bad as I remember it sounded," or that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, they are incredible. I'm someone who grew up with a Megadrive as my first console, and I've still got it here now, and I've still got all the carts and the games and stuff, and seeing I've got loads of Portasounds too. I've got a few.
Which ones?
A couple.
I'll tell you which chip is inside.
I've got the 280. Oh, sorry. Just let me put the light on. It's got two 570s that are boxed, but in some countries they're called the 480.
Yeah, I think that's an OPL2 if I'm not mistaken inside.
I love that one. It's got a digital modulator section.
I think that's the so-called Sound Blaster keyboard from the 8-bit guy.
It is. That's the one.
Yeah.
And then there's a PSS 280 there. But I think I have the 580, the one that Portasound looks like.
Yeah.
Is it the 580? But hey, man,
I just put that on I have a huge Excel sheet of a cheat sheet of all the Yamaha synths and which sound chips they're inside. Because even though I drink and I dream about them, at a certain point they're numbers and Yeah,
exactly. That's so cool that you're doing it a DX7 thing, man. Is that because on your website there's a couple of things that says future?
Yeah, we don't even
FC.
list it. We don't even list it.
Yeah, because it's not. Yeah, because you have an FC and a 64, which are both future products.
Yeah.
I'm guessing where the 64. I'm guessing the 64 is not the Nintendo 64.
No, but we need to change it because I never thought people would get confused by it. But millennials and people younger than me are interpreting that as we're making a Nintendo 64 plugin, which is really not the case. So
Amateur hour.
I'm changing its name to C64 because C64 is not trademarked, so that's kind of cool.
Isn't it?
No.
Wow.
If you trademark C64, it's actually sort of metal. like the trademark C64 is owned by a metal alloy company. It's kind of fun.
Amazing. The stuff you model's been incredible, and I think you also add elements to them to enhance the playability, don't you?
Yes. Typically, we try to do it in a way that it doesn't. What scares me a lot is making like these extensions, if you will, of the original limitations. Because if you send your beta to a sound designer, and all the presets that come out don't recall you of like what it's supposed to sound like, then you failed. I mean, you've exposed too many new stuff that I mean, it needs to still feel like the limitations of what you would do normally. Typically, the only thing that we had is pitch resolution is in enhance with an opt-in sort of stuff, or the polyphony is improved, so you can play full 6 chords. So typically what we do is, like, for instance, the Genesis or Megadrive one voice is in one entire Genesis or Megadrive. So you can stack like the 6 FM voices plus the 3 pulses and the noise and or one sample inside one voice. Nobody would do that, but...
That's cool, man.
Yeah.
And also, I guess also the things you didn't have with these keyboards was like the MIDI control. So that's also like something that you've never heard is like a really on beat riff from an old PSS keyboard.
Yeah.
There is also an arpeggiator, I think, on the Porta FM, and a really nice reverb as well. That reverb.
We've used that same reverb for a decade. I mean, it's. It served us so well.
Yeah. What is it? Where did that come from?
It's Ambience. It was a smart electronics Ambience reverb that was.
I remember it. Yeah, it's
early.
Orange and blue.
Yeah.
That's it.
And basically, we licensed it and used it for like. We need a reverb. Like, why don't we? We're a different kind of. We're not. The DSP interest that we have as a company is really in how to assemble things on the digital side, but we're not the best people like crafting reverbs or filters to a certain extent. I mean, we could, but it's not the stuff that drives us in the morning. For us, we're not really interested in making bread and butter effects at all.
Especially when they've been done to a really high
and by
standard.
people like they could eat me for breakfast and.
Yeah, that guy that made Ambience, I think he was called Mark or something.
Magnus.
He had a really good... I remember years ago going to his webpage and getting loads of free plugins. Ambience was just like one of like 6 or 7. But you know what? It's really reassuring to hear that you've used that in Portasound, because I didn't know that, and I used to use that plugin like years ago and like I loved it then. Yeah, man. So you've done, just to point out something that's really cool about the Chipsynth MD, you can load VGM files.
Oh yeah.
So this is an incredible feature for me.
That is one of the things that like people around me in the team or friends or testers said, it shouldn't be on the VST plugins. It makes no sense. Of course it makes sense. Like not only it allows me to listen to stuff and to see if my code is right, which is one of the reasons it's there in the first place, but I mean just to be inspired by like years and so many great artists and soundtracks that gives you shivers, and to listen to through them on your DAW with your ASIO drivers and your proper outputs. That was the reason. You can slow it down and see how it was made and study it. For me, that's the most important part of what we do. I mean, you need to be able to, it's not just this, you don't just sample like a few waveforms of FM and ship a product. You need to feel and twist it and study and learn it and see how it's made. Like share the joy that I had making this and understanding the software, so you can like, I don't know, circuit bend it a certain way yourself and see how it works and mute this and pan this and.
I think that is the amazing thing from my point of view, and I'm sure from lots of people in your audience's point of view, is that there was so many iconic computer game like songs and sounds, and when you load the VGM file into Chipsynth MD, you can like mute and solo those tracks, and you can hear like just the bass line from
Sonic or whatever.
What's the oh fuck, I've forgotten the Sonic 2 level. Is it called Marble? It's not called Marble. Mystic Cave. You know the bass line of Mystic Cave? Like that was just like, we used to love that bass line. It was just so amazing. And you can now load it up and solo it and just listen to that. And then not only that, I mean, I get excited just doing that, but then having it mapped across my MIDI keyboard and being able to play like, you know, multiple notes, it's just an amazing feeling, man. And I'm sure for people who don't have the nostalgia, it's also still an amazing thing, because the sounds are great.
Yeah, and there's some people say, is that legal or is that not legal? The way I could spend an hour on because it was really something that I thought about, and for me it's a way to it's an homage to what these early composers did, and all the limitations that they have to go through, and the fact that they made all these fantastic pieces of music with all these limitations, and many people can learn from that. Like, listen to that, it only has 6 voices, and that was lucky. And I mean, just strip out the layers and go to the essentials. And just talking of bare like copyright, of ripping patches and sounds, I thought the composers didn't want that, but I mean, some of the pro composers in the day said, no, we love this. I mean, I can rip my own stuff and I want people to study them. Oh, so you're not pissed off about it? No, absolutely not. So some vintage video game composers were like actually thrilled about this option to just rip sounds and to study.
Definitely. No, there's definitely that element to it, and it's really nice to hear you say that they're sort of endorsing it, because you can understand why. They're not getting those SNES games and the Megadrive games. They're not selling as new products, so I guess they're not like losing out on anything.
Well, if they're completely pirated, yes, you see how Nintendo does takedowns of all the emulation side, because those IPs are still worth a lot, especially to Nintendo, because they keep rehashing the Zeldas and the Marios and the whatevers over and over.
Yeah, but not the F-Zeros, so I don't know why they don't do F-Zero.
We all have our favorites. F-Zero's cool.
Yeah, they are notorious, aren't they, Nintendo, for like taking things down.
But we don't bundle with them or anything. It's up to the user to decide what they do with it. I mean, we can't stop them from ripping them and making remixes, and don't blame us. I mean, we're giving the tools, and for us, it's to study the tracks, do whatever you want with it.
Definitely, and you're right about the limitations. You know, the limitations that those composers had. They were limited to like 3 channels of sound and one channel of noise, and that's it for the whole thing. So they had to use inventive ways to make a thing sound like a delay. You know, just lowering the volume of the notes like it's being echoed, or
nowhere as crazy as in the Commodore 64 though, because the recycling of the voices, the best composers, you really feel like you're hearing like 6 or 7 parts, and it's only 3 channels with recycling, and like putting a bass drum and a bass note separately on different beats, and it's just amazing.
Definitely, I think the limitations across the board with a system like that, not the sound, the graphics as well, because you were limited within a square to what colours could be displayed. Incidentally, have you seen the new Dizzy game? Do you remember Dizzy?
Yeah, I remember. Well, it was more of the UK thing, if I recall, but I did see it. Yeah,
I think it's a Spectrum. Maybe it's a Spectrum incarnation, not a Commodore 64. But there's basically a new game of Dizzy that you can play online, and it takes advantage of the graphical limitations, and it makes the graphics super colourful. But without destroying any sort of clarity. Like, it really looks visually beautiful, and they're using the graphics in a way that no one ever thought about using it like that in the past, because you wanted the main character to be blue and the background to be red, so you wouldn't ever let those two merge. But in this latest Dizzy game, they've got an amazing sort of visual theme to it that just looks fantastic. Am I right in thinking there was recently like a leak or someone found an old a manual for one of the old FM synths?
Yeah, there's someone. Well, I thought you meant the recent Nintendo.
Oh no, the Giga Leak, that was amazing as well.
Yeah,
but no, there's
and we didn't look at it. If you look at all the serious emulation circles, we do our best not to read it, because that would put especially products like Mame, projects like Mame, which I contribute to part-time, would if it was known that some of their reverse engineering was made using proprietary stolen material, it would jeopardize the whole thing. So nobody in the team has the right to look at it, and they don't want to. And if somebody mentions something that's potentially dirty in a way, I mean, we're all angry. We don't want to. And personally, I understand that. And whatever I see, if I see something written online about this particular sound chip, or somebody says that this does this that way, I say, okay, maybe let's verify. I never take anything for granted. And I'm fascinated by other people's research, but I never just say, okay, that's the way it works, and I implement it in C++ and I sell it. No, I need to verify always. But your question was, what again? The leak. Oh, the FM.
There was like an FM. There was like a Japanese manual that got leaked.
Yeah,
for one of the big.
It's not really a leak more than the sort of manual.
Sorry, yeah.
It's basically Yamaha. I'm fascinated by all the chips Yamaha made, and they made so many. And they make manuals like yearly or something like that, with all data sheets for all the current products. Oftentimes, if they have, there are some chips that Yamaha make that's just for internal purposes. Like, you don't have data sheets of the FM chips and the DX7. It doesn't exist. You can't find it. If it's a Sound Blaster chip, then yes, there's manuals that you can order, and you sign an NDA with them. They give you an application manual that tells you a bit more about the inner workings of this particular chip. Though, for emulation perspective, it's still too high level to get like all the gritty details. It still gets you a long way. And otherwise, you only find like data sheets, which is basically just electrically, how do you wire this thing in a system, or if you need to repair it, like troubleshoot, like what's a +5, what's ground, what's digital output, input, so you can figure out if a chip is working or not. But if you want to get deeper and implement, create a design with specific Yamaha chips, you need to have the application manuals. And this is not what's been leaked. What's been leaked is, and it's not even a leak, it's just really a binder that's been scanned of all the data sheets of lots of Yamaha chips of like mid-90s or 96 or something like that. And there weren't things I didn't have, maybe one or two things that I didn't gather, like from scourging the internet and doing searches in Japanese only, and tricking the Yamaha website into trying all the, because the Yamaha website did list some of those at one point, and you could type a random number and find some new data sheets you never knew existed in their search engine. So I did that for a while. That was fascinating.
That's cool, man. And just talking about like your latest thing that is released, the SNES, the SFC, the Chipsynth SFC. It's got a cool feature where you can load samples into it. Is that right?
Yeah.
I haven't
basically, if you I don't know how much you know about that, but the Super Nintendo was essentially 8-voice wavetable system where you can have ADPCM, some format of ADPCM called bit rate reduction, or BRR, which you could cram. Maybe a game would have, I don't know, anything from 4 kilobytes to like 16 kilobytes of compressed waveforms with loop points, with like lots of limitations in terms of loop point sizes needed to be a certain length. So it was kind of very, very limited, but it allowed us to have strings and pianos and, real samples. So you'd see closer to the Amiga. Think of an Amiga with 8 voices and better interpolation. That would be the SNES with an echo baked in. So typically what you do is you import your own samples, but if we allowed importing like 4416, like 3-second samples, it wouldn't fit it. So basically we have a gauge online where if you drop too many samples, you know how far you are from like the reality of what was possible at the time. So you could try to insert a bunch of like modern samples, and you can downsample them all non-destructively in the application, and you watch your gauge. And if in your gauge say, okay, you're reaching the 100% of sample capacity, you stop there and say, let's make a song like it's 1991.
Right.
So that's the thing. So you can either
That's cool.
with MD, you can listen to like all the classics, the Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, Zelda, Metroid, and the Donkey Kong Country, of course, series, and rip samples and analyze them the same way in MD, but with full samples. But now the copyright part gets a bit more tricky, but people like David Viens weren't stressed about this. Yeah, so you can import your own samples or rip them, but again, if you don't own the copyrights, and that's the other interesting thing, talking with the old engineers, they all said, we just ripped the Korgs and the Yamaha rumplers, like just, we didn't have even the right to do it in the first place, so just rip them, we don't care. Like very few, just
Wild
like
West days.
just like with the
computing.
Amiga, like the amount of people that actually sampled their own drum machines, and like people were ripping each other all the time. Like you hear the same samples and strings and flutes all over.
That's cool, man. That's amazing. I wonder if you could make your first ever Steinway piano in the SNES.
Yeah, it sounds like it does when you take one sample of piano and stretch it the entire 8 octaves, unless you make like 3 sections. But you could make 8 different sections, 8 different samples of piano, but you never hear a multi-sampled piano in the SNES ever. I mean, the one piano note or the one string sound that comes. Oh, this string sound is when you boot up Chipsynth SFC. You're presented with the Emu Marcato string that was used in Pet Shop Boys and I don't know Kate Bush and all millions of soundtracks. And to me, that's the Zelda string sound. It's
Nice.
and it was using the Kurzweil and the Emu, and you don't even know in the professional Rumpler market, like who owns the original rights to it. It's not even clear. Like, was it Emu that came to Emu, Emax, or Kurzweil, or Roland? Like, you find the same samples everywhere, even in official banks like this. So there's a whole scene on Discord that is fascinated by figuring out like each sample of each video game of like especially the Nintendo stuff and the PlayStation, like which sample library it comes from and which old Rumpler it comes from, how it's been resampled, who recycled the sample of someone else. And they make lists and lists and Excel sheets of guesswork, but sometimes with frequency analyzer and spectrum analyzer. Yeah,
Wow.
No doubt it's Roland expansion, this and that for that particular Rumpler.
Amazing. What an incredible dedication to
It's a rabbit hole, and I don't get into that because I'd go crazy. But it's people are very, very enthusiastic about that.
Yeah, I do love. I've got to say, I do love the Emu sound.
Oh, yeah.
You did mention early on, the 90s was an amazing time for gear and for music equipment. Yeah, the Emu. A lot of the Emu stuff, I love all those little romplers. All of the rack mounted. The Proteus 2000 and
They all have their
those back.
artifacts and filters and grain and limitations. That's why all our emulations are. We kind of put the threshold on the mid 90s where we lose interest, but because if it sounds like General MIDI or too high quality, it's just very boring. It has no charm. It needs more grit. It needs more distortion. It needs limitations. It needs frequency and envelope resolutions. That's
Exactly.
where, yeah, for me, that's the interesting part. Like, what do you do? And especially, what do you do? Like, how do you design a synthesizer? How do you design a console? How do you design a video game or a soundtrack with these limitations that are unique to each platform? Or as an engineer, the first sound chips were amazing, where most of the original sound chips were designed by non-musicians. So especially the Atari stuff, you can't tune the thing. It's not made on any scale. It doesn't have the pitch resolution that's required to do a simple like C major scale, or let alone pentatonic, you know.
Really? Is that the ST?
No, the DST is able to do that. I'm talking the Atari 2600, the TIA chip, and the Pokey chip. Pokey chip is a bit better, but there's a whole line of story about by a scholar called Karen Collins here in Canada, made like the scores of this particular Atari 2600 game, and the choices of notes and pitch were directly related to the limitations of what were achievable.
Right, wow.
So you see all this B here is like 20 cents flat down and was still used because, you know, so it was microtonal before it was like all the rage.
Cool, yeah. I do love that, and I think there's a lot in the limitations that the early like composers and video game programmers had, and also people making music in the early days, electronic music, you know, having to use like DIN sync with, you know, like all these just try and get things to work with limitations. It made you really inventive, you know.
And you quite hear the kind of errors that the early 80s bands had, like the weird splices and
yeah, when things don't loop properly. Like, yeah, there's hip hop tracks where they're playing the loop, and it's like it doesn't hit loop properly, but like that's sort of the charm. I think there is a few dance tracks.
We didn't care back then, but now we've like we're completely spoiled with perfect looping of everything, and you listen back to that and you spot all these errors which in top 10 you'd never hear and never care about. Our ears, our minds are trained to perfectly accurate clock of everything because of DAWs, DAWs. But when I started, like, you'd get sync errors. I was running Cakewalk 3.0 and something called, I don't recall, some crappy app where you had to stop every 1 minute and just to resync audio and MIDI because they'd go out of sync. It was infuriating.
Yeah, right.
And just to have like a 4-minute track dumped to tape, like real like a compact cassette that we did in the days, we couldn't do that. Oh boy.
Yeah, man, it's a lot easier now. I do like, though, you know, I like the hearing loops that are like mistimed, and yeah, like it's sort of nice. It's like when DJ sets now aren't quite the same with people mixing on like software that it all tracks together, because I like the phase of the kick drum. You know, when the phase didn't quite work, and it like sometimes the kick drum just disappeared for a minute when people were mixing. Like, I love that. I think that there's something that happens in DJing.
Yeah, the risk that you get DJing, like seguing from one beat to the other, and I didn't practice that enough, but there were some times when I got it perfectly, and the warm feeling of beat matching two different records and we're in tune. Or, I mean, it was a lot of practice. I don't want to sound like an old guy, but I wouldn't have as much fun, apart from knowing which track goes well with the other and knowing the mood of the crowd. But to really making one beat kick into the other and changing one song to the other, finding what works, was... It got your heart pumping, because you could screw up. You could screw up, and the whole crowd could go, "What a crappy DJ that is." And so it was really exciting, the challenge of, will I make it? Do I have enough time to segue it and rewind it, and before people like stop dancing, go and do somewhere else or go to the toilet or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's cool, man. Just quickly, what do you do with Mame? You mentioned Mame there. What sort of stuff do you do with
I
Mame?
do some casual... I mean, it's kind of weird because so much work has already been done. But if you look hard enough in the console video game history, you'll find some things that were sold for a few months and got completely... like discontinued or completely overshadowed by the Nintendos or stuff like that, especially in Japan. Lots of small consoles were released, and even here, I mean, I'm talking consoles that had maybe 1,000 units produced and like 5 games or stuff like that. This is the thing that really drives me on I have eBay watch list of really, really obscure consoles, and sometimes I'm the first one to get it that has remotely like technical knowledge of electronics. So, and those are really moments of bliss where I can say I've contributed a whole driver to Mame. Like, this complete system was forgotten. It was all listed like photographs of screens, and I know some guy who might have a cassette or a game that works with it, and to make it available for that everyone can play it, I've made the full driver for the Unisonic Champion, which nobody has heard of. I've partly contributed to the Casio PV1000, PV2000, and the Epoch Super Cassette Vision, which are 3 consoles from Japan that were completely overshadowed by the Famicom. And they all have their quirks. They're not that interesting, but I feel in 100 years from now, if I didn't make it, then it would probably be lost. And yeah,
that's brilliant, man. That's amazing. I mean, that is, I think people are realizing now, like, that the video games are a huge part of our life, and that backing up that history of the things that have gone by is really important.
Especially because if you know right now, like, I mean, I don't know if you still game, but, and it's not really true, and I'm not a modern video game specialist, but you see all the big productions, the AAAs, like, they go with, there's much parallels to be done with the movie industry, where blockbuster first and all the money goes into that. There's much less things that surprise you in gameplay and gameplay ideas, although it's not true because of the homebrew community and the indie video game developers are creating some amazing new things with new ideas. But in the early 80s, nobody wrote a book on how to make a video game. Like, all these different attempts by different companies, or how do we display video and how do we play sound that makes it exciting, and not just talking like video games, but arcades as well. Like, all these different arcade machines that have different sound and videos and different things that we're trying, and sometimes are unique and forgotten. This is fascinating because nobody knew what worked, really. They were trying things. This is what makes the golden age of video games and arcades very exciting to me.
Excellent, man. Excellent. Yeah, well, that is tremendous that you're getting these consoles and submitting drivers for them and keeping that history going. I'm a big fan of a podcast called The Retro Hour.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love that stuff. And yeah, I don't really play any modern video games. My interest is solely in what was happening 20 years ago.
30.
And yeah, I
make
really
it 30, 40 now.
Yeah. Great, man. Well, just a couple more questions. Just a couple of short bits. Just, is there, like, what else do you like to do aside from sort of making programming, leading VST plugins and stuff? What other things do you like to do in your life when you're not doing that?
Yeah, well, it's kind of related, but I started. I mean, I've been programming for 20 years, so the next challenge was always like hardware. I know how to understand hardware, but right now I'm at the point where I've been dabbling for four or 5 years on creating my own hardware. So that's incredibly rewarding, and the learning experience of that is amazing. So you get the same the tricks that I've learned to troubleshoot what's wrong applied to real physical things instead of code. It's satisfying and frustrating in different ways. So right now I'm creating part-time some kind of weird modifications. I like modifying old consoles, so I'm putting this further where I've created, it's on my YouTube channel, where I make these little boards that replace the CPU of old consoles. So I made a board that replaces a Z80.
Wow.
I made one that replaces a 6809, and I made one that replaces the CPU of a Nintendo or Famicom. And so you just lift the CPU, you put my board inside, and it has an ARM chip, powerful enough, like 200 megahertz. So I can code in C++ and drive old consoles with modern code. And I don't have to code in 6502 assembler or stuff like that. So I can do, there's MIDI inputs and SD cards, so I can load ROMs and VJ and DJ and do demos or trackers or just full MIDI synthesizers out of that platform. So all my evenings, if I'm not doing VST work, I'm doing hardware synthesizer. So that's really, and sadly, while I have lots of music gear and guitars, and I don't do as much music as I can, and I have some tracks. I do collabs with a good friend of mine, and I have stuff that played on radio, local radio here, mind you. That got a little bit of airplay, but I don't pretend like I'm a very good songwriter. I do love that, but the amount of frustration in music making, and the fact that I know what I think I'm good at it to a certain extent, but I don't think I can provide the world with as much. How can I say that? My creative contribution is better served with code and electronics than with music, because I think my knowledge and interests are, I don't know, at a certain level. I don't say I'm the best at what I do, but I think I can provide good stuff that not everyone else could do. Whereas if I make music, I'd probably drown in a sea of million of similar sounding acts, or I don't think I can provide something new right now. Maybe at one point I'll release something, but the bar on my own music creation is so high that I can't even listen to the stuff I do more than 15 minutes.
That really resonates.
Sorry.
That really resonates with me too, man. No, it really resonates with me. Yeah, and I think you are tremendous. You're tremendous at that programming stuff. Certainly, yeah, like one of the best in the world at creating what you create. And you seem to be really driven by that stuff, which is massively important.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's becoming more of a comfort zone. So like an artist like Bowie would constantly challenge himself or change cities just to become uncomfortable and be able to create again. Or you take a guitar and you tune it differently to be impressed and surprised by it again. That's why I'm going to electronics, because I've been doing that for so long. So thank you. But I still feel like like the imposter syndrome is like plastered on my forehead a lot. Most days. I get some days where I'm proud of myself, but the rest of the time I have so much to learn still.
Yeah, I think that's you can use those thoughts and feelings to drive you forward as well, I think, I've certainly suffered from imposter syndrome a lot. I call myself midierror for a reason, So, yeah, I think, but those things drive you forward to keep creating, don't they? And to keep learning and to keep getting better and to keep doing, just not being, not resting on your laurels.
Oh, that would be, resting on my laurels or going to code for banking systems would be the same thing.
Amazing. And just finally, do you have any philosophy for life or any mantra that you particularly go by?
I think we briefly discussed about it. Is if you're not happy, think of what can make you happy and do it. It's just as simple as that. But people don't get they should get a kick on the back just to do it. Who cares if you're poor for a while? Who cares if you have trouble struggling? If your perseverance is, just do it. I don't know. Just go do what you want to do, even if it's hard. Wake up in the morning and try to find. I guess I'm lucky. It's not everyone who can, get lucky enough to get money to do exactly what they want to do in life. I'm extremely fortunate, and I know that. But I think there's many people that could achieve this state and don't do it for some reason that's entirely theirs. So work on that. That would be my
very good. Yeah, totally agree. I think it doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that you could expect happen overnight. But I think if you do go on the path that you want to go on, you want to carve a new path. It's a great philosophy, man.
Yeah, life is too short to be miserable.
It is. We're not here for very long, are we?
No.
Amazing. Well, I really, really look forward to the future of what you're making.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people do. Huge artists, composers from back in the day. So looking forward to seeing more from you very soon.
Thank you. You will. We'll keep churning it up.
what a top guy David is. Really, really amazing insight into his career trajectory. I really, really admire that he doesn't stay in a job hating it. Like he has to give his actual heart and soul to something, which I just think is an amazing philosophy. What a cool guy. Yeah, really, really enjoyed that one. I'm a big chiptune fan. I'm a big video game fan. So that really, really floats my boat. As will the next episode, which is with an absolutely iconic chiptune artist. It wasn't done on purpose. These two are just next to each other. So yeah, that's going to be really, really, really incredible. Yeah, please donate to the podcast if you can. It'd be very, very much appreciated. I do all this by myself, and I do love doing it, but it would be great to get some support back from you all. Excellent. Thank you very much for listening. I'm midierror, and I'll see you again soon.